let's move to our closing topics. I think we could spend a lot of time on this. Will one of the best 4 teams in Major League Baseball win the World Series? We're going to write about this in Just Baseball as well. There's 4 teams now. I think we have seen a separation of tiers, right? There is the top tier and there's everyone else. And that top tier is 2 teams in each league. It's Orioles and Yankees in the American League, Dodgers and Phillies in the National League. So let's just start with those 4 teams. Do you agree that they have really sort of risen above everybody else? And if you had to pick a World Series winner right now, it feels like it should be one of them.
It absolutely does, because you look at so many teams in baseball, even after you take away the bottom tier, even if you take away the Marlins, Rockies, A's, and White Sox, everyone else is just around the middle. There's just a lot of compression, a lot of questions about, well, this team should sell, but they're maybe playing a little bit better than they should. This team was supposed to be a contender, but they haven't been that great. So how are they going to figure some things out? So I think we'll get a normal trade deadline for the most part, but it's going to take a while for things to really develop because everyone is in the middle. But as you said, there's 4 teams very clearly at the top and 2 from each league. And it just shakes out perfectly, as you said, for any one of these 4 teams to take the whole thing and be the World Series champs, especially because their rosters are so solid and you don't really have as many concerns about depth, right? And you say, well, hey, if someone goes down, someone like Atlanta, who we really considered this perennial contender, they lose Spencer Strider earlier in the year, and Ronald Acuna goes down, and all of a sudden they're not the world beaters that everybody predicted that they would be. Well, the Yankees, Orioles, Phillies and Dodgers, they've got tons of world beaters right now. And if somebody goes down, they'll be able to find a replacement and be able to sustain that. And with still there being 7 weeks or so until the trade deadline, maybe 6 weeks until the trade deadline, if somebody does go down and they're going to be out for a while, you can go ahead and find a replacement. So Phillies are feeling that right now, obviously with JT Realmuto, who is a player who's incredibly valuable and is kind of underrated for all the things that he does. And if they do need to go out there and make a move, so be it. If they don't, they'll also be okay because they've got a stacked roster of guys that are doing it that you expected them to do it. And it just hasn't been a surprise.
Yeah, the Phillies have gone without Trey Turner, and Mundo Sosa just steps in. And that's what you see with good teams. All of a sudden, that role guy just has a little more confidence because the pressure doesn't feel as daunting as it might when you're filling in on a team that's struggling to keep their head above water. For the Phillies, it's like, all right, so let's just go play a ball. He's doing a great job of it. Now we'll see if Garrett Stubbs can do some of that at the catcher position. The Yankees have been without Garrett Cole all year and have still been arguably the best team in baseball. So there's just a certain level that these teams are at that it doesn't feel like any other team can really catch. But what makes this conversation interesting is the fact that the favorites don't always win in Major League Baseball. If you talk about a field of 26 teams, and we can go through all of them, ultimately it's going to boil down during the playoffs to 12 teams. And 4 of them are going to be the ones we're mentioning. We know the Orioles, the Yankees, the Phillies, and the Dodgers will be there no matter what. But there will be 8 other teams, and that's still an 8 out of 12 shot to win the World Series compared to a 4 out of 12 shot. So the field versus those 4 teams. Do you believe in any of these teams? I'm going to rattle them off. Braves, Mariners, Guardians, Royals. Let's actually just start there with those 4. I think they're kind of that tier below the top 4. You could throw the Brewers probably in that conversation as well. So Braves, Mariners, Guardians, Royals, Brewers. And then you have teams that might get way better at the deadline. But there is still a chance that any of those teams, if the Guardians make the right move at the deadline, if the Royals make the right move, if the Braves do the 2021 thing, like there's a chance that one of these teams that we are looking at right now that might just be hovering somewhere in the middle ends up actually being the one that's holding the trophy when it's all said and done.
So if given the choice between the big 4 and the field, I'm taking the big 4 because, as you just said, the best teams don't necessarily go into the World Series. And we saw that in 2023, where 2 of the wild card clubs in the Rangers and the Diamondbacks went on. If you get a first round bye, you get a wild card round bye. That's hurting teams for some reason. Eventually, those top tier clubs will have that figured out by getting the first round bye. But in the Big Four, we do have two teams from the American League East. So the Yankees, hey, if you get knocked out in the first round because you had 5 days off, so be it. But do you know who stayed sharp? Do you know who stayed hot early on in October and built up that momentum in the wild card round? It's the Baltimore Orioles. So using that logic, which is sound, it's good logic, the Baltimore Orioles are going to win the 2024 World Series. Put a stamp on it.
I buy it. I can see it for sure. I mean, the Orioles, they have the rotation to do it. And I think that's the thing about all four of those teams. They all have great rotations. And so for me, if I'm to argue the other side of it, I look at Seattle. And I feel like Seattle is one of the teams that has a real puncher's chance. I want to see them do some stuff at this deadline. Like I said, like I want to see them trade for Pete Alonso maybe, or trade for Luis Robert. And it hurts me to say the Pete Alonso thing, but these are the big bats that are there for them. Grab one of them, because if they can just make this lineup a little bit better so that when they are in the tournament, they have a couple guys that can leave the yard at any time and give their pitchers a lead, it doesn't feel like they need that much. I mean, their rotation is so good. I could see the Mariners going for a run. The Guardians are another team. The Royals, their rotation's been really good. We can never count out the Braves. To me, it almost feels more fun to ride the field. Like maybe I'm just an underdog guy at heart. I agree. I mean, look, if I had to pick one team to win the World Series, I'm picking one of those four. But if you're giving me the opportunity to take 26 teams versus 4 teams, and then I'll get an 8 out of 12 shot in the playoffs, I like the odds of saying the field's going to win it, because there's just more teams that can get hot. And I think the Diamondbacks and the Rangers and even the Phillies from the year before showed us any team can get hot in October and make a push.
What I'm hearing Ryan Finkelstein say is the Colorado Rockies may be a force to reckon with in October. That's what I just heard you said. You said 26 teams as the field.
No.
You didn't say 22 teams. You said 26.
Okay, 22. I'm sorry, 22.
We'll edit that part out. We'll edit that out.
We could probably narrow it to like 16. I'm not sure if I'm buying into the Nationals or the Pirates or the Mets, but I do look at the collection of, because we were just talking Braves Rangers. I mean, excuse me, Braves Rangers. Rangers Astros. We were not talking Braves Rangers. We were talking Astros Rangers. Either of those teams, if they get in the mix and they're a lot different in the second half, I mean, hell, if everything goes exactly how the Rangers want and they're throwing out their Evaldi, Scherzer, DeGrom, Gray, Molly, they have just this ridiculously deep well of pitching. I mean, they could defend their crown. And then the Astros are the Astros. So the fact that you add those two teams in as potential wild cards, quite literally, it makes me feel better about saying the field might actually take this thing.
There's so many facets that go into having a successful team and a successful roster, because you got to have those top tier players as your 10 best players, right? Then in general, you got the 26-man roster, but at some point you need the full 40-man roster with guys going on the IL. And then even beyond that, I mean, think back to when Atlanta had to start like Dylan Dodd, and you see how critical Brandon Pfaadt was for Arizona when at the All-Star break, he's back home in Kentucky hanging out, and the pitching coach is getting in his ear saying, we need you in the second half. You are going to be critical to the success of the Arizona Diamondbacks. And he absolutely was. And I think teams that are successful build up that kind of depth. And on the flip side, again, the Colorado Rockies last year, when they lost 103 games, they had no depth whatsoever. And so when their guys went down and got hurt in one of those, unfortunately, worst case scenarios, there was no depth behind them whatsoever. And they were just hemorrhaging losses here and there. And that's kind of happening a little bit this season too, with a lack of depth. But those top tier clubs have those players, as you said, that can step up, like an Edmundo Sosa for Trey Turner. And now Garrett Stubbs is going to have to do that just a little bit with JT Realmuto being out. So those guys and that system, they really help breed success because they've got so much depth, and because the top 10 players in their lineup, in the rotation, in the bullpen, starting in the field, are so elite that they're going to carry everything else, that they're going to go ahead and lift the entire roster to some relevant games late in the season. The best teams are the best for a reason.
Yeah, I think we have to check the last couple of years and see if it's true. But to me, it almost feels like this top tier is a little further separated than they've been in the past, where we're looking at four teams that seem like they might all be 100-win teams that really just are kind of overwhelming favorites at this moment in time, where it's hard to envision that one of the four of them is not holding it up. And that's why I wanted to do this exercise, because I'm basically just saying, hey, it's baseball, crazy stuff happens. I'm not really giving you the Mariners was one example where I was like, all right, that's a rotation I believe in. But a lot of these teams, it's just hoping that some fairy dust hits them at the right time. And the Guardians, who have been amazing this year, go for a run. Or the Royals. I think the one thing that could help the field in this conversation is that those four teams that are atop, they've already created a separation. They're going to just kind of coast through this year. Yes, their depth is good enough that it allows them to coast, but there is something to be said, and your Rockies years ago felt this, about that momentum you can grab by having to fight your way into the playoffs. And, we saw that to an extent with the Rangers last year, right? They had a chip on their shoulder when the Astros stole the division from them. And they had to go through all the tough teams on their road to win a World Series, to have to fight and beat the Orioles and just, keep on punching up. And then they had to face the Astros. There were so many different steps that they had to take before they ultimately won it all. I think that's the one thing that the field might have on their side is we don't know what team it is. It could be any, but one of these teams is going to have the right move at the deadline that makes them that much better. And they're going to get their way into the playoffs at the end, and they're going to have a tough matchup, and they're going to upset one of these four teams probably in that wild card round potentially, or maybe at the wild card round, but in the DS. And those are the things that could build up to a team that we're looking at now and saying, I don't see the Astros winning the World Series this year, to, oh my God, we were fooled. Here they are again, standing up and holding that trophy.
It's a fair argument. There's strength in numbers, absolutely, and building up that kind of momentum can be critical in the postseason. It's one of the reasons why Major League Baseball wanted to get away from a single wild card, because that team would surge right in and have the same rights, quote unquote, as a team that was the best in their league. So all of a sudden, wild card round, hey, now you're burning through possibly your best starter, but not guaranteed, because your best starter may have needed to go pitch on game 162 in order to get into that spot in the first place. So that's such a good analysis for why you would want the other 16 to 22 teams in baseball, and not just take Orioles, Yankees, Phillies, and Dodgers, because the postseason is just a completely different beast unto itself. And we've seen how the Dodgers have performed other than the pandemic year of 2020. We know the Phillies are always strong in the postseason. So you might even have the most confidence in them than anyone else. But, the Orioles are surging, and they're a team to beat for the future and in the present. And the Yankees are the Yankees. But it's been a while. It's been 15 years since they've won a World Series. So they've got a big hump to get over. Whereas the rest of the field, they're just bright-eyed and bushy-tailed. And hey, we've got nothing to lose. Let's go out and play. No one expected this out of us. So the logic there, it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, it's just when you frame it the way that we have here, of you have so many different bites at the apple with a team that can get hot. It's what makes it a conversation. But now I'm going to change that, where it's going to be a lot clearer. Let's just both pick our World Series matchup right now. Who do you have in the World Series? You mentioned the Orioles. Do you believe Orioles over Yankees? And then on the National League side, you have to pick one team to face off against them. Here we are, middle of June. What do you think is going to happen, 4.5 months from now?
The World Series matchup for 2024 is going to be playing this weekend in Baltimore, Maryland. Phillies, Orioles. It's going down. It's a preview. Now, because of interleague play, we get a preview of the World Series every year. It's now guaranteed. But this weekend, June 14th through 16th, you can get your first taste of what's going to go down in October. It's going to be Phillies and it's going to be Orioles. And using the logic that we've all created here and agreed upon, the Orioles are going to end up winning the World Series. And that's not just because I look like a prospect for the Norfolk Tides with my colors today. That was purely coincidental.
You really do, honestly. Yeah, I can see it. Yeah.
Well, I don't look like a prospect. I look way older. I look like a first base coach, but still, I do not represent the Norfolk Tides, despite the color scheme I've randomly selected today.
Maybe not a prospect, but could you be like the catcher that's hung around the minor leagues for a long time potentially? I mean, I think you still got that in
Yeah,
you.
I signed out of the independent league. You know, I'm
Yeah.
33,
Yeah.
but I've got something to offer. I'm a good teammate.
Yeah.
Fuck that guy.
I honestly I love that as a preview of the World Series. You know, a lot of people were throwing that around when Dodgers Yankees squared off last week for Sunday Night Baseball. It's, here it is. This is the big series. These are the teams. And I'll tell you what, if Major League Baseball was like the NBA in the past, in the early 2000s, they could pick who's going to be in there, they would pick Dodgers Yankees. That's what they'd want over anything. That would draw the biggest ratings. I think they would settle for Yankees Phillies as well. I think that does well. The funny thing is they probably want no part of the Orioles, despite how good they are, just because of the whole ratings thing. But I love that as a World Series matchup. I don't want to just echo what you said, but to me, that's what I'm hoping happens. I guess I could make the case for Yankees instead of Orioles, and that'd be the only way I differ. But I really see the Phillies as the team that's going to get there. And I actually think the Phillies are going to win it this year. I feel like there's something to be said about certain teams that have a 3-year arc. And this is just me trying to jinx it so that they never win it.
I know. This guy with the Mets pennant behind him. He's got the Mets hat on. The Phillies are legit. I hope that they – did you even say you hope they do it this year?
I don't think I said I hope.
Check the tape. Roll that back. Producer. Oh, wait. We don't have that.
Yeah, that's me in about 30 minutes going through this. No, I certainly don't hope that it happens. But I really look at the Phillies and the fact that they have been so close and they've been right there, some of the potential Hall of Fame talents on their roster that can rise to the occasion. Bryce Harper, who still does not have a World Series. Zach Wheeler, who we don't know about Hall of Fame, there's longevity, all that stuff that comes into play. But when it comes to Hall of Fame level contributors in October, Wheeler has been that guy. So I look at those two guys in particular as guys that have been amazing in playoffs in the past. And the collection of talent around them, Ranger Suarez being the story that it is, it just feels like the type of team that is currently authoring a World Series DVD with the way they played this season. But yeah, of course, I'm just trying to jinx them. Yeah, I don't want that to happen. I want any team outside of the Braves and them to win it. That's always, if the Mets can't win as a Mets fan, you just don't want those two teams to win. But that's actually been my existence in the last couple of years, just waiting for them to lose. And man, I was a big Diamondbacks fan last year. I mean,
who wasn't? Yeah, they were fun. It's funny. I was talking with my dad last night. We went out for early Father's Day dinner and getting ready for the show and saying, all right, well, what's the best rivalry in baseball? Because Yankees and Red Sox are playing this weekend. And he, as a Yankees fan, said, no, I don't think it's the best rivalry anymore. And I don't necessarily know which is the best, but it just doesn't have the same juice, right? Just doesn't have the same vitriol, I think, between the fans. Sure it is. But as far as players, not so much. And I said, well, you could it's like a 3-team, battle royale between the Mets, Atlanta, and the Phillies. Before I said, well, actually take the Mets out of that conversation right now because they just don't have that juice anymore. And so I think Atlanta and Philly might be the top. That kind of goes head to head with Dodgers and Padres. I think we might have talked. That might have been one of the first podcasts we did.
We did
best rivalries, right?
Everyone could go back. You find that on our YouTube, and you can hear us duke out all the different rivalries. And in that conversation, I said for some reason, even though it should be Braves Phillies, those two fan bases seem to maybe it's just because they love being able to punch down at the Mets the way they played. But there's definitely a lot of heat to all of those rivalries at the top of the NL East, or I should say the most notable teams in the NL East. I guess I can't call the Mets part of the top of the NL East. But hey, JD Martinez hit his first walk-off home run of his career, which was the craziest thing ever, that dude has never had a walk-off homer. And the Mets are playing some good ball. So I'll be watching that this weekend. We will be back for a show early next week. Appreciate all of you who tuned into our stream. Make sure you check out the Who's Better YouTube channel. Go all the way back. We talked about the best rivalries in baseball at the beginning of this season. That conversation really hasn't changed much. So you can check that out or anything else we talked about on today's show. Check out our podcast feed, Apple, Spotify, wherever you get your shows. You can find us on Twitter as well, or X, Who's Better BB. And like I said, we'll be back with another show early next week.